15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start your music.
Let me put your mind at ease. These are the words that bind all indigenous agreements with any other government. Our treaties were based on that philosophy. Our minds will be at ease when we hear the words of our ancestors whispered in our ear. This is what is entwined in our wampum belts and our agreements with the Crown and with Canada. It is the basis of our peace and friendship as nation-to-nation allies. The Haudenosaunee, meaning the people who are building the Longhouse, a peaceful nation, are an Iroquois-speaking confederacy of Native Americans and First Nations people. The English called them the Five Nations, made up of the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. After 1722, the Iroquois-speaking Tuscarora from the southeast were accepted into the Confederacy, which then became known as the Six Nations. The Confederacy came about as a result of the Great Law of Peace. At its peak around 1700, Iroquois power extended from what is today New York State north into the present-day Ontario and Quebec along the lower Great Lakes, upper St. Lawrence, and the south on both sides of the Allegheny Mountains into present-day Virginia and Kentucky and into the Ohio Valley. One of the first treaties signed was the Two-Row Wampum Treaty, made between the Haudenosaunee, or the Five Nations, and the Dutch officials. This first agreement, considered by the Haudenosaunee to be the basis of all subsequent treaties with the Europeans and the North American colonial governments. The basic idea is that we agree to be like two vessels sailing down the same river. These two boats will share the river and never interfere with one another. We agreed that each would live by the rules whichever vessel you were in. This was a sign of mutual respect. A wampum belt was made, and the words of agreement were spoken into it to keep the memory of the relations alive for many generations to come. The design of the wampum belt was two purple pathways showing the route of the vessels evenly spaced on a river of blue, symbolizing, well, the river of life. When the first Europeans arrived in North America, they had no idea how to survive on this land. They needed the indigenous people to show them where to gather medicine, find food, even how to stay healthy in the winter. Basically, not only survive, but how to thrive. The colonists wanted furs to take back, so they were totally dependent upon the indigenous nations to supply these furs. Business was good. However, the Europeans brought their old animosities and wars to the land. The English defeated the Dutch and made new treaties. They asked us to be their allies and to protect their economic interests, which we did. And every time we agreed to help, we put their mind at ease, because we considered them to be our brothers. Through our Silver Covenant Chain Treaty, we pledged to be allies forever. Time and time again, the Crown wanted our warriors to assist them. Time and time again, we shed our blood in defense of our brothers. One of these times was the American Revolutionary War. Joseph Brant, a Mohawk military and political leader who was not born into hereditary leadership, rose to prominence due to education, ability, and connection with the British officials. Rallied some Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga warriors to rise and defend the interest of their old ally, the Crown. Some Oneidas and Tuscarora warriors decided to assist their American neighbors in the fight for freedom. Being on opposite sides shook the very foundation of the Great Law of Peace, which was intended to halt war amongst the people. The price for aiding was harsh. American rebels confiscated most of the Mohawk homestead in the Mohawk Valley. The American soldiers destroyed over 50 villages with the intent of annihilating the Haudenosaunee. In 1784, Frederick Haldimald granted Joseph Brant and his followers a land treaty to replace what they had lost in New York State at the Sandusky Council after the Revolution. This tract, the Haldimand Grant, was about 384,451 hectares, or 9,500 acres, in size. 12 miles, 19.2 kilometers wide along the whole tract of the Grand River. Chief Brant relocated with many of his people to Upper Canada, to the area which is now Six Nations Reserve, where he remained a prominent leader and made an appeal on behalf of the Six Nations to the Crown to honor the pledge of compensating for any losses suffered. The Haldimald Proclamation of 1784 granted the Haudenosaunee 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, from the headwaters up north to its mouth on Lake Erie. This eased the mind of the Allies to the Crown. State of contentment did not last long. The Crown reneged on their pledge. The chiefs of the Haudenosaunee vigorously tried to get the matter settled, but the Crown refused to live up to their word. Joseph Brant tried to create a perpetual fund for the Haudenosaunee along the Grand River by leasing large plots to the Allies. However, the monies due for these leases was confiscated by the Crown, and there has never been an accurate accounting of what was due to the Haudenosaunee. At the end of the War of 1812, Superintendent of Indian Affairs William Claus spoke to the warriors post-battle and used the healing ceremonies that the Mohawks knew and practiced. With these words, he honored the warriors. "Your eyes are so full of tears that you cannot see. Clearly, your ears and throat are stopped up. Your hearts have been troubled with grief. Your limbs are still covered with mud. Your feet are full of thorns, and your seats are covered with blood." He then took a cloth and wiped the tears. He took a feather and wiped the dirt from the warriors' ears so they could hear the words. He then wiped away the mud from the legs of the warriors to unburden them. This was the first part of the ceremony. The other half was to recover the bones of the fallen and then to compensate the nations for their losses. After the War of 1812, the land matter grew worse. White squatters moved onto the Haldimald Tract, and the federal government first tried to remove them, but in the end sided with the squatters so they could keep the lands they stole and encouraged them to move onto the Haldimald Tract. Then the Crown finessed a number of alleged surrenders from the Six Nations, which further reduced the Grand River Territory to its present-day reserve boundaries, which rapidly divided the land into smaller plots and sold those plots to Canadians. In the end, the people at Six Nations only held about 48,000 acres, a small percentage of the 1784 pledge. In 1820, 1830s, and in the 1840s, the colonial government of Upper Canada began to encourage white squatters to move on the Haldimald Tract. In 1845, Indian Superintendent David Thornburg convinced the chiefs to move to the present-day location, where their lands could be better protected, and the remainder sold for the benefit of the Six Nations. However, there was never a surrender to authorize this, and the general surrender of 1841 was never recognized by the chiefs. The chiefs were ignored by the Crown. The courts favored the Crown. In 1921, the Six Nations took the case directly to the Crown in England. Cayuga Chief Descahe was denied. In 1922, Descahe carried the same petition to the newly formed League of Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. Canada responded by sending the RCMP onto the Haldimald Tract in 1923 to investigate the chiefs and to undermine their standing within this community. Canada denied Descahe the right to return to his home, and he died in exile in New York State. In response to the Six Nations petition, the federal government passed up a Privy Council order in 1924 that replaced the existing Council of Hereditary Chiefs with elected council. This was in part response to an internal petition with the Six Nations of the Grand River community, as some more in favor of the elected system. The current litigation has gone on for 28 years and still more years to come. Canadians who thought they had a clear title to the land are now confused, feeling betrayed by their own government. There is no certainty, not yet. The only certainty is that Six Nations of the Grand River are rightfully due compensation for the money held in the name by the Crown. In the words of Chief J.S. Johnson, were it not for the bravery and the faithfulness of the Six Nations, the flag of Britain would not today be waving over this fair dominion. They are not likely to abandon their homeland. Then, and only then, can the Six Nations of the Grand River and the Canadians walk together as allies, reconciling the past and building a mutually beneficial relationship for the sake of future generations. 240 years has been long enough. It's time to resolve these matters once and for all. Then we can all put our minds at ease and face the climate change together and ensure that the future generations will be born into a healthy and safe world.